Well, if they don't leave, they should be arrested and tried and sent back to their homes.
One day we did Ajawa State. We group ourselves Ghanaians. How we go do? Where we go? Hide. Some people say let's go up Okuta. So Kwara State, some push they there. Let's go. Police come surround us. They carry us. In Ghanaians, many, let's say in thousands of Ghanaians, they put us for trailer. One big trailer, go dump us, cross the semi border, go dump us for Cotonou, bury ground.
The compliance order was given by the Busia government. Everybody was saying that they say Nigerians should leave. They say Nigerians should leave. So everybody was running helter-skelter. People were selling their properties, buildings, and running to Nigeria. I was then a student. I think I was in my first year or second year at Legon.
This is just a bag at first glance. But between Ghanaians and Nigerians, it's more than just a bag. It's linked to a historical incident between the two West African nations. In Nigeria, this bag is widely called Ghana Must Go. In this video, I'll tell you the reason behind that name and the entire truth about Ghana Must Go. What most of you know is only the half-truth. You think you know all about that incident? No, you don't. There is a lot more you missed, and that's why I'm here. So grab your popcorn and pay attention. My name is Nana Kwesi, and this is book number 7. Consider subscribing if you haven't done that already. In January 1983, Nigeria deported all Ghanaians residing in Nigeria. But there is a twist to this story that you may have not heard. To understand why that happened, we have to rewind more than a decade earlier to Ghana in 1969 and the decision there that set the stage for what came later. In 1969, Ghana was under a new civilian government led by Prime Minister Kofi Abrefa-Busia and the Progress Party. On November 18, 1969, Busia's cabinet issued the Aliens Compliance Order. It was short, clear, and strict. The order told all non-citizens without proper residence and work permits to leave Ghana within 2 weeks, with some professional categories given a bit more time. It was enforced across the country. The order targeted no one nationality on paper, but in practice, it hit West Africans who had been living and trading in Ghana for years, including large numbers of Nigerians. Markets in Accra, Kumasi, and Sekindi Takrade had long been linked with Nigerian traders. Many of them suddenly had to show papers they did not have, or they would have to leave. By the late 1969 into early 1970, estimates suggest around 200,000 people were pushed to move. Different sources give different numbers for how many were Nigerians, but a very large number were Nigerians. The timing was tied to Ghana's own economic troubles after years of instability and a difficult balance of payment situation. Buzia's government said the labor market needed space for citizens. The policy was controversial in West Africa, but it was carried out. For many Nigerians, the shock of that expulsion lingered. Only a few years later, West Africa went through a major shift. In 1975, leaders from the region signed the treaty that created ECOWAS, that's the Economic Community of West African States, with a promise of freer movement of people and goods.
It is also my sincere hope that our deliberations at this meeting will set us firmly on the road to the fulfillment of our commonly held aspirations for greater effective cooperation of the countries of West Africa and a more cohesive and prosperous sub-region as part of and contributing to a progressive and equally prosperous continent. This is a momentous day, marking as it does the fulfillment of many hopes, the result of persistent efforts on the part of leaders from all corners of West Africa, another major and concrete step in giving practical effects to aspirations which we all share and which in various previous meetings, conferences and groups, we have all endeavored since the beginning of the last decade to bring to fruition.
Nigeria, that had become rich from oil exports in the 1970s, became a big magnet. Construction boomed in Lagos and Port Harcourt. Factories needed workers. Domestic service, retail, and informal work absorbed people at scale. Ghanaians, facing worsening conditions after 1979, and then another change in government at the end of 1981 under Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings and the Provisional National Defense Council, kept moving to Nigeria. The Ghanaian cedi struggled. Shortages grew, and bushfires and drought would make 1983 especially hard. Nigeria, by contrast, still looked like a place where a person could earn real money, send something home, and maybe start over. But Nigeria's boom did not last. By 1981, the global oil price fell, government revenue shrunk, and the economy slowed. Lines formed at petrol stations. Factories cut shifts. Unemployment rose. In the north, severe unrest at the turn of the decade left deep scars. Politicians accused people they called illegal immigrants of taking jobs and contributing to disorder. The federal government, led by President Shehu Shagari, was under pressure. It was an election period in 1983. State governors, unions, and prominent voices in the press called for tighter borders. Immigration officers raided markets and workplaces.
I will quit you now.
Street talk turned harsh. The idea that Ghana had sent Nigerians away in 1969 was still alive in public memory, and it gave a simple answer to a complex problem. If they sent our people away then, why can't we send people away now? On January 17, 1983, President Shehu Shagari's government announced that all foreigners without valid papers had to leave Nigeria within 2 weeks. Note the words. 2 weeks. Exactly the grace period the Ghanaian government gave for illegal immigrants to leave Ghana years before. This is what I call tit for tat. You do me, I do you.
Well, if they don't leave, they should be arrested and tried and sent back to their homes.
That was just by the way. So the deadline was set for January 31st, 1983. The message was direct and it was enforced. People were told to go to the borders or ports and leave. The order did not name any nationality, but the largest single group affected were Ghanaians. There were also Nigerians, Chadians, Togolese, Beninese, and others who had come for work over the years. News moved fast by radio and word of mouth. Bosses told workers not to come back. Landlords demanded rent or departures. Stores sold out of a particular cheap woven plastic bag because people needed something strong to carry clothes, pots, radios, and documents. That bag already existed. But in Nigeria, at that moment, it got a new name. Ghana must go. The deadline created a rush. Trucks were loaded sky high. Families climbed onto lorries with their bags and mats. Streets that led to the Seme border crossing between Nigeria and Benin filled up. The plan for most people going to Ghana was simple. You leave Lagos, you cross into Benin at Seme, then you go east through Benin to the Hilakonji, crossing into Togo, then east again to Aplao into Ghana. But politics and security issues did not make that road simple. Benin, under President Mateo Kereku, allowed transit, but its small roads could not handle the volume. Togo, under President Nyasimbe Eyadema, had tense relations with Ghana. Ghana's eastern border with Togo had been closed in late 1982 after a sour turn in diplomatic ties and security concerns. When tens of thousands of people suddenly tried to move across West Africa in January 1983, they met closed gates. They piled up at the narrow line between Benin and Togo, or waited on the Benin side and slept in open truck parks. Some tried to go by sea. A few chartered vessels from Lagos towards Tema and Takoradi in Ghana. Even those options were limited and expensive. Images from that time show people still in their clothes from work, sitting on their bags, babies asleep on laps, men arguing with police over papers and passes, elders just staring at the line of trucks ahead. Nigeria's immigration officers were told to ensure compliance, but avoid chaos. In practice, there was both control and chaos. The deadline was so tight that the government had to soften it at the edges. Enforcement continued into early February. After negotiations, Togo allowed transit corridors, and Ghana's government began to reopen its eastern border at Aplao to allow citizens back in. The return became a slow-moving wave. It took weeks for many to reach home. In Ghana, the situation was hard. 1983 would be remembered for drought and bushfires that spread across the country's middle belt, killing crops and making food scarce. The economy has shrunk for years. The PNDC, under Jerry Rawlings, was hunting for a way to stabilize things. In April 1983, Ghana would launch the Economic Recovery Program with support from international financial institutions. But in January and February, the resources were not yet there. Returning citizens, often without cash or jobs, needed transport from the border to their hometowns. They needed food and lodging. Families absorbed relatives into small rooms. Churches and community groups did what they could. The return changed Ghana's labor market almost overnight. Traders who had spent years in Lagos or Ibadan brought with them knowledge and networks. They did not bring much money. The stress was real, but so was resilience. The expulsion looked like a mirror of 1969, and the mirror mattered. In Ghana, many remembered how Nigerians had been pushed out of Ghana under the Aliens Compliance Order 14 years earlier. In Nigeria, many framed the 1983 order as fair payback and a practical response to an economic downturn. But the deeper truth is that both countries were dealing with their own domestic pressures at those moments.
From 85, that time, where Buhari and Idi Agbon can't drive us for Ghana must go. So that Ghana must go was so strict to extent that Buhari was announced in the radio station. Anybody sees that you harbor any Ghanaians or any aliens in your house, in your company, they will seize your company or they seize your house, because all of them were afraid. So because of that, we're ready to go. How can we go? Okay, one day we did Ajawa State. We group ourselves Ghanaians. How we go do? Where we go? Hide. Some people say, let's go Abeokuta. So Kwara State, some push they there. Police come surround us. They carry us. In Ghanaians, many, let's say in thousands of Ghanaians, they put us for trailer. One big trailer. Go dump us. Cross the semi-border. Go dump us for Cotonou bury ground. And the bury ground be like the whole island. The bury ground. Very big place near sea. Be like the whole island. Go dump us there. So they go dump us there. And they dump us there. Nigeria soldiers cross near semi-border there. You cannot cross them. Come inside, come and buy food. Whereby we host more, everybody hosts more money. Cotonou soldiers also block, let's say, from here to Aja side. So you cannot cross them too. Go Cotonou, go buy food. So we there inside murder, under coconut. Every day we they eat coconut, morning, afternoon, evening. Fresh one, dry one. Fresh one, dry one. Crying for God. Where our help from? Is it how we are going to die? Every morning when you wake up, say, this one die, you. This one, people are crying. And that bury ground, you cannot sleep. Because that big ant, black one, and that red one, where they eat human being, they eat flesh. They there were well. So the place where they bury people, where they cemented it, now that place will give breastfeeding mother, those who born new, we put cloth for them to sleep. But we boys, we carry the coconut branches, the dry one, set fire. We set fire. Different places so that the ant can die. So we want to sleep. If you want to sleep, we just stand up. Just go for coconut tree. Stand for coconut tree. Because you cannot sleep for ground like that. We suffer. We slept bury ground there for good 2 weeks. playing and praying. Some pastors they every day, every night they go run. Let's play. Oh, how God will hear our prayer. It's more than Egypt. Israel from Egypt coming to Canaan land. It's only the Red Sea we can say we cannot cross. It's more than that. Many people die, many people born. From one day, that 2 weeks time, one day, we see one Airbus, army Airbus, that's a plane, big one, rolling with the Ghanaian flag, coming to that place rolling. We don't know how many Ghanaian flag therefore, army Airbus like that, with this, rolling for that place. Hey, we carry our hand because coconut plenty. So we follow them, go far, small. Follow them, go far, let's say from Oshodi to Mushi side. We follow them, go far, that place where there is no coconut, but that place be like swamp. Yes, water there small and the poto there. And that place, plane come down. It cannot land inside the poto, it cannot land inside water. So the plane come down, let's say about 3 feet. Come down for 3 feet, hang there. It was shaking like this. And you will see the pilot come outside, not to that our former president, Jerry John Lawrence. He hear our cry. God touch him in Ghana. He hear our cry. He come there with the plane. Then they put small ladder like that. Then they say, call them. We just call them. We hold those people who get belay, they cannot walk now. We call them. We put them first. The plane carry 120 passengers, but they load us about 200 sitting down there. So, wait, I should come back again. It go about 10 or 15 times. Carry all of us, reach Accra. And moment you reach you, they guide us. They don't let anybody go. Moment you reach you, they give you food first. After food, they lead you to one tent. They give you injection, treat you fine. They give you place to sleep. Yes. So by 3 days time, they say, Lawrence want to come and talk to us. He came there with the people. He said, yes. Who are the Cotonou people? Cotonou people should come like this. Togolese, you come like this. Liberians go like this. Because we are many. We don't know who be who. Not be only Ghanaians. Nigerians carry us drop for burial ground. Brothers and sisters, I slept for burial ground for good 2 weeks. If you see our body, not be small thing. So as you come to us, Cotonou people go like this. You load them for plane, the same plane. You go about 2 times. Carry them go. As he come back, carry Togo people, Togolese. Go them to Togo. After Togo, he come back, say, we have people from Senegal, Singaro people. They carry them go. From Côte d'Ivoire people, carry them go. So you remain the Ghanaians. Then the Ghanaians say, if you don't get money to go your village, government bosses, something like, BRT. We come and so BRT carry people. They go their villages. At that time, finish. So this how God do for me, but still.
By the time of the aliens compliance order, I was actually in Kumasi. And what I remember was that, when the compliance order was given by the Bushia government, everybody was saying that they say Nigerians should leave. They say Nigerians should leave. So everybody was running helter-skelter. People were selling their properties, buildings, and running to Nigeria. I was then a student. I think I was in my first year or second year at Legon. So you used to come to where we were around 37 area as people were moving, heading towards the border of Aflao to continue their journey to. But one thing I've always said was that it was out of fear that our people started moving. Because they said aliens compliance order, if you don't have a resident permit, go for one. Regularize your stay. But our people didn't understand. They didn't know how to go about all these things. And the fear that something might happen for so many of our people to leave unceremoniously.
I will recall
this thing, when Busia came, it happened during the Ramadan. We started the fasting, about 10 or so, and said, this is Radio Ghana. Since that time, I've memorized the thing and it's my head. Say Ghana Munti, those days is Ghana Munti, Ghana Munti. They say, this is Radio Ghana. The time is 6 o'clock. That was what he was reading that day. The wording was that it has come to the notice of Ghana government. It has come to the notice of Ghana government that a lot of aliens are living in the country without the requisite papers. So the government is hereby giving all those people 2 weeks to regularize their papers, their documents. Else they have to leave the country. That is the wording. They didn't say pick your bag and tomorrow go.
In 1982, when I was in Jos, I was one of the person Nigeria was also pursuing to say go back to Ghana. Yes, they attacked me several times. They captured me even inside the vehicle. If I had known, I would have followed them to Ghana. And
why did they say that?
They say I look like Ghanaian. They say my structure, my face, everything look like Ghanaian. I black like Ghana. So I must go. I say I'm not Ghanaian. So I'm a Nigerian. Until they took me to my state, Cross River State, to find out with my parents. And that is why they released me. If not, they chase Ghana like if you are chasing animal. Say Ghana must go.
Everything.
I'm like the way I am now. They pursue Ghana, and that's why you see this Ghana must go. They fold themselves, they fold them to go back. You know, sometimes when people look down on somebody, God carried you up.
In 1969, Ghana's leaders were trying to show they could enforce order and prioritize citizens' jobs in a shaky economy. In 1983, Nigeria's leaders were trying to calm public anger, reduce pressure on services, and show strength in a tough election year. The memory of 1969 gave Nigeria a narrative that the public could grasp. It was not the only cause, but it was a powerful political reason that made the 1983 decision easier to sell. That decision had wider regional implications. ECOWAS had been built in 1975 with the idea of free movement. Protocols on travel and residence were adopted in stages in 1979 and the early 1980s. But those protocols assumed calm times, not an economic shock, and a sudden pushback against undocumented workers. Nigeria argued that many of the people leaving did not have legal papers and that the law had to be followed. Critics argued that the spirit of ECOWAS was being broken and that the 2-week deadline was unworkable and inhumane. The reality at the border was that paperwork often did not exist. Many migrants had entered years before without formal stamps. Employers had looked the other way during the boom. Police had taken small payments instead of issuing documents. When the hammer came down, the people at the bottom bore the brunt. Numbers tell part of the story. Different agencies reported different totals, but the range is clear. More than 1 million migrants left Nigeria in that short period. A large majority were West Africans. Of those, roughly 700,000 or more were believed to be Ghanaians. These are estimates, but the scale is not in doubt. In some Lagos districts, whole compounds seemed to empty. In motor parks, conductors called out routes eastward all day. Traders sold bags, ropes, and food to travelers. Informal money changers did brisk business. The phrase "Ghana must go" moved from a joke in the market to a label everyone understood. It was not a kind label. It hurt, but people wore it because they had to keep moving. There were smaller stories inside the big movement. A teacher in Ibadan who had come from Cape Coast to Nigeria in the 1970s married and had children who had never been to Ghana. He packed up books and exam papers, not knowing where he would teach next. A carpenter in Lagos Island who had a steady line of clients asked to leave the next day by a landlord afraid of a raid. He put his tools in the plastic bag and hoped he would not lose them on the road. A woman who sold stew and rice in the market near Mile 2, suddenly told by the Market Association that stores could not be kept by foreigners anymore. She used her profits to hire space in a truck and shared water with strangers. Families were split when one spouse had papers and the other did not. Children cried at border posts and then fell asleep on sacks of clothes when the queue did not move. All of this happened without the world paying much attention. It was a regional story, quietly huge. At the highest level, leaders made statements. President Shehu Shagari defended the policy as a legal necessity. His ministers explained that the order applied to all undocumented foreigners, not just Ghanaians, and that people with valid permits could stay. Ghana's head of state, Jerry Rawlings, criticized the short notice, but urged calm and organized the reception of returnees. Togo and Benin coordinated passage after initial hesitation. Ghanaian diplomats in Lagos tried to help citizens secure travel and protect their belongings. Journalists reported from the Seme crossing, describing long lines of lorries and the frustration of drivers who had to wait for days because the road through Benin was clogged. The movement did not end on January 31st. People were still moving in February. For some, the journey took more than a week because every border meant another queue. Ghana's border posts at Aplao, Elubo, and other points saw more traffic than they had seen in years. The pressure eased as the weeks went by. Back in Nigeria, enforcement did not end in 1983. After the change in government on December 31st, 1983, when the military took power, there were new waves of expulsions in 1985 that again targeted undocumented migrants. But the 1983 wave is the one most remembered because of the scale and the symbol. The plastic bag earned its name in a way that says a lot about how people remember policy. A government order does not stick in public memory as a legal paragraph. It sticks as an image. In Nigeria, the bag became shorthand for people who arrived from elsewhere with not much more than clothes and courage. In later years, Nigerians used the phrase "Ghana must go" to describe the bag without even thinking about the story behind it. The bag's name traveled further. In Ghana, people also called it that, half in sadness and half in pride for surviving that chapter. In other places, including Europe, the same bag picked up regional nicknames. But in West Africa, the name came from January 1983 and that first sprint to the border. The long-term effects did not show up in 1 year. In Ghana, many of the returnees settled back into towns and villages and started again. Some built new stores in markets. Others took up farming or used skills learned in Nigeria to start small workshops. Ghana's economic recovery program in April 1983 began to stabilize the currency and revive exports. The return of skilled and semi-skilled workers contributed to rebuilding. It was not easy, not quick, but by the 1990s, Ghana's economy was more open and Ghanaians were moving again, this time more often to Europe and North America than to Nigeria. In Nigeria, the departure eased pressure at the bottom end of the labor market in some cities, but the deeper causes of unemployment did not go away. The oil market still shaped the economy. The policy satisfied a public demand at that moment, but it did not solve Nigeria's economic puzzle. The relationship between Nigeria and Ghana went through repair and renewal. Governments traded visits, reopened channels, and used ECOWAS to talk through differences. In the long view, both countries learned that big expulsions harm regional trust. Yet, politics has a way of repeating itself when times are hard. Every few years, someone raises the old argument about foreigners and jobs. The memory of 1969 and 1983 comes back. It is a reminder that citizenship, paperwork, and belonging are not just legal issues in West Africa. They are also emotional and historical issues. People remember who welcomed them and who sent them away. The retaliatory frame matters in the story because it helps explain the mood on the streets in Nigeria in January 1983. When radio hosts took calls that month, they heard from listeners who said, "Remember 1969, when our people were told to leave Ghana? When local officials enforced the deadline, they sometimes use that memory as justification. But retaliation alone does not explain policy. There were practical reasons: a deep recession, shortages, and the politics of an election year. There were also security arguments that undocumented populations made it hard to account for movement and that crime reports involved some foreigners. Some of those claims were exaggerated by gossip. Others reflected real concerns. The 2-week deadline was political theater and real enforcement at once. It created a sense of immediate action. It also created humanitarian problems that had to be managed. What about the law? The ECOWAS Free Movement Protocol of May 1979 provided that citizens of member states could enter for up to 90 days without a visa. The right of residence and establishment were supposed to follow in later phases. Nigeria argued that undocumented workers who had overstayed or taken up residence without permits were not covered. Critics said the spirit of ECOWAS was being undermined by a blanket push of people who had lived and worked in Nigeria for years. Because administrative systems were weak, proving who had what status was difficult. That's why the order fell on everyone without a current card. It is also why the return looked indiscriminate from the ground up. Some of the most powerful images and memories of Ghana Must Go are about the border at Seme. Drivers described entire nights spent without moving. The air was filled with the noise of idling engines, the smell of fuel, and the hum of thousands of quiet conversations. Food vendors made a living selling water and simple meals to travelers. Local families opened their yards to people who needed to sleep or wash. Children found ways to play between trucks. People told jokes to pass the time and stop themselves from worrying. Rain or sun, the queue moved slowly. When people crossed into Benin, they breathed a little easier, but knew 2 more borders lay ahead. By the time they reached Aplao, the mood changed. Many kissed the ground or just smiled in relief. Then they had to get from the border to wherever home was. That could still mean days of travel on bad roads with few seats. Buses were overloaded. Trains were not an option in many places. But home was close enough to touch. In Accra, Takoradi, and Kumasi, the return created new social patterns. Households became layered. An aunt sleeping in the hall, a cousin on a mat in the shop. Goods were scarce, but people made space. Some returnees organized cooperatives to pool small savings and start trading again. Others joined state programs that offered temporary work, though those were limited. The church and mosque networks helped with food. Later that year, as policies took hold and the farming season advanced, life became a bit more stable. In stories collected years later, many returnees said the shock of being told to leave hurt the most. They had lived in Nigeria for a decade or more. Their children spoke Nigerian slang or pidgin. They had friends and neighbors. They did not feel like strangers. Having to leave so quickly, with only what you could carry in that plastic bag, changed how they saw borders forever. In Nigeria, people noticed the change in their neighborhoods. The sound of some languages disappeared from the market. Certain stores were empty for a while. Rents changed. Some Nigerians took over shops and trade routes that Ghanaians had been running. In some trades, prices rose briefly because fewer sellers meant less competition. In others, prices fell because demand had fallen too. It was a mixed effect. Politically, leaders pointed to the expulsion as proof of action. For a time, that message worked. But by the end of 1983, Nigeria had a change of government after a military intervention. The new rulers promised discipline and order across the board. In 1985, another wave of expulsions took place, though without the same nickname or the same iconic image. The bag remained. It shows up in a different kind of story too. Years later, in Nigeria's public life, people began to refer to stuffed plastic bags as a way to move cash. That was a separate story about public ethics, but it shows how language bends. Ghana must go became shorthand for a container that carries more than it looks it can. In homes across West Africa, the bag still holds clothes, bedding, books, and memories. For some, it still holds the memory of a road back to Ghana in the early months of 1983. A journey made because of a law announced on January 17, 1983 with a deadline of January 31st. And a return shaped by the reopening of the Aplao border and the relief of stepping onto Ghanaian soil again. A complete account also returns to the starting point in Ghana in 1969. The Aliens Compliance Order under Kofi Abrefa Buzia was harsh in its own way. Officials enforced it in markets and workplaces. Families packed up and went east to Togo and Benin or west to Cote d'Ivoire, depending on where home was. Nigerians who left Ghana in 1969 told their children that story. When Ghana Must Go happened 14 years later, that story was used as a frame. Some said it was justice. Others said it was just the same mistake in another direction. Either way, it shows how policies made in times of economic pressure create echoes that last. The facts matter because they fixed the story on specific ground. 1969 in Ghana on November 18th, an order with a 2-week deadline. 1983 in Nigeria on January 17th, an order with a 2-week deadline ending January 31st. Leaders with names and faces: Kofi Buzia in Ghana in 1969, Shehu Shagari in Nigeria in 1983, Jerry John Rawlings in Ghana in 1983, Mateo Kereku in Benin, Nyasimbe Eyadema in Togo. Borders with names: Seme, Elakonji, Aflao. Ports with names: Lagos, Tema, Takrade. The sequence is clear. Deportations in Ghana first, then in Nigeria years later. The reasons were not identical, but both were tied to jobs, money, and politics. The human cost was carried in those bags. There is also a lesson about regional cooperation. ECOWAS promised free movement and still does, but free movement needs systems that can handle stress. In both 1969 and 1983, documentation was weak. Work permits were not easy to get or keep. Employers used informal labor to cut costs. When governments decided to enforce rules strictly on short clock, there was no safety net for workers who had settled into lives across borders. Today, when leaders talk about integration, they refer back to those years as reasons to build stronger, fairer systems that do not end in mass departures on tracks. The memory of Ghana must go pushes the region to do better than improvisation. For the people who lived it, however, the story will always be personal. A man will remember selling his radio to pay for lorry space and holding onto the handle of that plastic bag with a grip so tight his hand hurt for days. A woman will remember her child asking if they were on a trip, and her answer that yes, it was a trip home, even though home was a place the child had never seen. A young trader will remember counting the days to the deadline and deciding that leaving early was better than risking trouble. A grandmother will remember arriving in Aflao and seeing a familiar pattern of cloth and crying at the sight of it. Those details are why the history sticks. When people today use the phrase "Ghana must go" without thinking, it's worth pausing a second. The phrase comes from a serious moment in West African history. It contains a story about two governments responding to hard times with strict rules. It contains the political memory of 1969 in Ghana and 1983 in Nigeria. It contains the journey of hundreds of thousands of people carrying their belongings in checked plastic bags. It contains border gates that opened and closed, and the slow work of rebuilding lives on the other side. It contains a lesson that when you tie identity to papers too tightly and give people almost no time to adjust, you produce a tide of movement that leaves marks for decades. The story ends in a quieter key than it began. There was no single day when the Ghana Must Go movement stopped. It faded as people reached home and settled. The roads cleared. The stores in Lagos found new occupiers. The markets in Accra gained new sellers. The bag, cheap and tough, went back to being a bag. But the name stuck, and with it, the memory of January 1983, and before that, November 1969. If you listen closely in a market where those bags are stacked, you can almost imagine a long queue at Seme, The voice of an officer telling people to move along. The member of families deciding what to keep and what to give away. The relief at Aplao. The knowledge that what goes around in politics can come around, sometimes years later, and that the people who pay the price are those with the least power to change the rules. That is the story of Ghana Must Go. Not as a slogan, but as a lived experience from one West African country to another, from one decision to another, from one bag onto the next. So, if you didn't know, now you know the whole truth about the Ghana Must Go incident. Anyway, don't go yet. Watch these 2 videos next and subscribe as well. I'll see you when I see you.